Today we're going to discuss the new book from R.F. Kuang, Babel, or should I say Bad Bell, am I right? Hi guys, welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about a book, I guess. So today I'm talking about the new release from the one, the only Miss R.F. Kuang. This is Babel, however you want to say it. And I just finished this book over the weekend. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a brief synopsis to give you the flavor of what this book is about for you to help decide whether or not it's for you. I then will go into some probably pretty ranty feelings. Like, I really did not enjoy my reading experience for this particular book for many reasons that I will get into. But before we do that, let's just talk briefly, what is she even about? So Babel is basically historical fiction with light fantasy elements. It is set in the mid-19th century, mainly in the University of Oxford, with this made-up Center for Translation there. And in the beginning of the book, we are introduced to this character. He becomes to be known as Robin, but basically he is a Chinese boy whose mother dies from a plague, and he gets saved from this plague and whisked away to the university in London by this professor who teaches at Babel, because they need native speakers of these different languages to work at these institutes, because the way that this world functions is basically silver is able to capture the meaning lost in translation of words. So for example, if there's a word in Chinese and a word in English, there is some nuance, some connotative meaning that is lost when those words are translated. And if you transcribe those on a piece of silver, that silver can harness that and elicit some kind of response. For example, it can stabilize buildings or make cars go faster or clean the air or any number of different kind of effects depending on the pair of words that are used with each other. And so basically we follow Robin and friends as they are undergraduates at the University of Babel in this Institute of Translation. And that's about the first 60% of the book, is mainly these vibes following them in classes. And then there is an inciting incident about 60% of the way in. And then we follow the things that happen. As is in the title of the book, this ends up being a story about a student-led revolution, and it focuses a lot on themes of British colonialism. There will be the East India Trading Company, the greed and racism that goes into kind of that colonial philosophy of, we don't care, we'll take whatever we want to benefit our people because you are lesser. So while I do think that the themes are important, I didn't really enjoy the kind of surface level way that I felt that they were explored in this book, but we shall come back to that. But that's basically the gist of what Babel is. So if you love kind of these linguistic play on words where you're learning about the etymology and the roots of different words, I just kind of took it at face value and assumed that she did all the research to make sure that those meanings and things were correct. I didn't actually look any of them up to check myself, but I just assume. But basically, if you are really into linguistics and you're really into that kind of history of language and meanings lost in translation, and you're okay with a book largely just vibing following these kids at undergraduate university, then I think that you could really love this book. If you're looking for a little bit more nuanced discussion on some of these themes and plot, then I don't know that this book would be for you necessarily. So I'll keep this spoiler free the whole time, but let's talk about overall feelings for this book. So in the first 10 to 15%, I was kind of enjoying it. I was enjoying kind of talking about that translation and how there's not necessarily one-to-one equivalence, especially when you're going into English, because a lot of different languages, especially Romance languages, have this kind of foundation of gender built into their language system, where even certain words are feminine or masculine, and so there's these meanings that are lost in translation. And I'd been talking a lot about this with my husband recently, because we've been watching Brazilian Iron Chef and just random shows in Brazilian because he's from Brazil. And so we had been having these kind of discussions about, oh, what does that mean? And then he would kind of chuckle sometimes because there's not really a direct translation, or he would laugh sometimes at how it was translated on the bottom versus what was actually said. And so it was very timely because we had already been having a lot of these discussions. And so I was enjoying seeing that in the book, but then I felt Like, by the time I got through this book, we spend so much time on the etymology. It's given so much page, and this book is only like 540 pages, which is like, for a standalone fantasy adult novel, it's not like the longest thing ever. And so we spend a significant chunk of time just following these kids in classes and talking about this etymology and all of that kind of stuff, that I felt like the characters kind of suffered and the plot kind of suffered. Like, if you strip away the like shiny bells and whistles of all of these like cool meanings of language and stuff like that, I feel like the characters that you're left with are pretty one note, and the plot itself, when it actually friggin' ever gets going, is not that interesting. So, for example, these kids, the way that they were described on page, felt very like surface level nerdy students. They all just love learning so much, and just like, I don't know. So I think another thing, before I delve into some more issues that I have with the book itself, I also have issues kind of with the discussion surrounding this book and some of the stuff portrayed. So while we're at school with these kids, it's kind of that typical glorification of being an overworked student. You have to stay up all night studying and blah, blah, blah. And then you have to sacrifice everything to pass these super crazy tests and all of that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's kind of bleeding in, because I've heard about it all over the twatter that the author has either one or multiple PhDs, and she's almost lauded as this superhuman being. And that kind of bleeds into the work, right? Because then we see her kind of lauding this like crazy, overworked, underfed, like malnourished student to be able to survive in school. And just like, I have such a strong hatred of that kind of theming and messaging around like, you have to basically sacrifice everything in order to be successful. And I myself am, if you've been on this channel for any period of time, I'm in the last year towards my PhD in biochemistry, and I have just come to discover that that kind of ideology is really prevalent, especially in academia, this celebration of productivity over all else, regardless if that affects your sleep, your health, your anything. As long as you're productive, that's kind of glorified. And that's really like strongly reflected in academia in particular, because basically your worth as a PhD student is how many papers have you published. And so you can look at different people getting different kinds of PhDs, and people will be lauded and celebrated, and it's almost the goal to be these people publishing 5, 6, 7 papers before they graduate. However, they don't ever talk about like the cost of that, because that means that that person is probably working 10 to 12 hours a day, probably at least 6 days a week. They've sacrificed almost everything in this pursuit of just being overly productive. And that comes with costs to your mental health, to your social life. And I'm not saying that those people don't exist who just find fulfillment from their work. Like, that totally is a valid way of being, existing. And if you're the person who you just get recharged by the work that you do, that's lovely. But like, not everybody is like that. Some people work, and that work takes a toll on them, and so they recharge in their spare time. And I just hate that in our society, we so laud and so celebrate these people that have sacrificed everything in the sake of productivity, while we kind of look down upon people who prioritize their own mental health. And they're people who know that they need breaks, that they need to have time to read in the evenings, or they need to work 5 days a week and not 6 days. Like, people who understand how to be able to provide for themselves while also being able to maintain their own mental health. That's almost like looked down upon and treated like you're being lazy. And that just drives me nuts. So just a lot of the discussion around this book has already kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because people are just like, oh, R.F. Kuang is the most amazing human being that has ever existed. And I'm not saying that she doesn't deserve praise. She writes a very good book. I mean, the book was well written, well researched. It didn't work for me, but I don't think it's an objectively bad book. And she has written another trilogy in the Poppy War that people really enjoy and they really like. And so she's written books that have gotten a lot of success. She's also been able to do these different academic pursuits at a relatively young age, but then people almost like compare themselves to that and feel worse about themselves because they haven't produced in this more like traditionally academic, productive way that society tells you is the only way that's like correct or worth praise. And so I like to remind myself and others through discussions like this that it's okay to only work 4 or 5 days a week, work your 40-hour work week, and then find fulfillment in your off time, be that through travel or reading or video games or whatever. Like, you don't lose worth as a human being if you're not in academia or producing best-selling novels. Like, I just hate that that's like so almost idolized, and I just wish that that wasn't the case. And so then when I started seeing some of those themes seep in with the characters, I was just like, oh god. So that's that. And then the book itself, so it just feels very full of itself. And so it's hard, I get it, when you're writing anything in academia, it's hard to not come off with a certain sense of pretension because you are being very lofty in your word usage and all of that kind of thing. And so there's almost like a inherent sense of pretentiousness that comes along with writing in academia, period. But that, along with the kind of self-indulgent, just overuse on all the time about this word, which could mean this or this or this, or this word, which could mean this or this or this. And I think it just suffered from one-dimensional characters, because these characters felt like caricatures of overworked students to me personally. And I felt like, especially since we're in a time period in a country that people are fairly familiar with, like mid-1800s in the British Empire, that's right after the US had its War of Independence, and Britain is trying to keep a stranglehold on the territories that they still have left, and they're being very crazy and greedy and all of that kind of stuff. At least from a US perspective, that period in history is explored pretty commonly in especially schools. So since it's a time period and a place that people are more familiar with, I was hoping that it would take a more nuanced look at colonialism and the racism that backed up colonialism and all of that kind of stuff. And just for me personally, it felt a little surface level and a little shock factor with some of the things that happened later on in the book. And I found the ending to be wildly unsatisfying. And so it was not fun to read. Because literally you're going to read it and like 60% is like, okay, I get it, we're going to school. And some of that might be because I'm still in school myself, so reading about people for like 300 pages about their classes and all these snooty academics, I'm just like, okay. But like, on the plot itself, I was never particularly surprised or shocked at the direction that it took. So be that as well, I did think it was a cool magic system. I did like the idea of harvesting the loss of differences in meaning, especially as cultures have been in contact for long periods of time, like French and English. The meanings tend to kind of converge, and so that distortion of meaning starts to be lost over time, and so that's why they needed to expand and take on other languages like Chinese or Indian or Sanskrit or all of these different languages that they end up trying to pull into Babel. So like, that part was kind of cool, I guess. So would I recommend this if you're looking for really fast-paced, super intense plot? No. Would I recommend this if you are a particularly character-driven reader and you want to fall in love with these characters? Also, no. Because while we do get the backstory of our main character, Robin, his 3 friends and their kind of cohort their backgrounds are never really like delved into that deeply. They each get a 1-chapter interlude way further into the book, almost to the point where you're like, well, I may have liked that person more if I had known that sooner, but it was trying to be like dramatic in its reveal, but it just was like too little too late. And so just like, so it's not even really if you're super character driven. I would say, one, if you're a history buff that's particularly fascinated with colonialism and you're really fascinated by this period of history, like mid 1800s, which is the 19th century of England, and the East India Trading Company and some of their dealings with like China. So then this book would probably definitely appeal to you. Or if you're just like fascinated with linguistics and you don't mind tons of footnotes and like kind of unnecessary asides about, oh, well, this random phrase, which means this in this other language, or it could also mean this. And like, if you're really into that, then I think that Babel could totally work for you. But if you go into it kind of thinking that you're getting this adult fantasy, absolutely not. You're getting much more this historical fiction with ever so slightly fantastical elements. And you're going to get It's really going to be focused on that whole language thing. The colonial aspects and some of the deeper themings around like racism, especially in academia, are not going to be delved in a super nuanced way. It will be kind of surface level, but they are there and they are important themes to discuss, obviously. So, yeah. I mean, I left this book extremely disappointed and really annoyed, and I am not even keeping this special edition copy. I'm sending it on to a friend who will love it and cherish it herself, and she can friggin' have it because I want it gone. Like, get out. But I hope that this gives you, if you're trying to decide if Babel is for you or not, I hope this gives you maybe a little bit more of a grounding on what it is, what you can expect from it, and whether or not you yourself should read it. If you have read it and you want to discuss respectfully in the comments down below if you agree, disagree, or ambivalent about my thoughts and feels, that's fine. You can put it all down in the comments down below, and while you're down there, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already for more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!